Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I did not plan to stay at the lake through the end of the season. The last weekend traffic had already thinned out, and the rental dock house stood quiet in that way buildings do when all the vacation gear goes into storage, and the last receipts are boxed up for next year. The place sits on the south shore of Raquette Lake in the Adirondacks, a long body of cold water surrounded by mixed hardwoods and white pine, with one narrow gravel road dropping down to the launch and a short wooden dock leading out to the rental slips, old boards, old nails, and a roof patched more times than I can count. When the first alerts hit the radio the week after Labor Day, I was repairing a warped door on a storage shed, trying to beat the autumn rain. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 34, a former park ranger and wilderness safety instructor. That means I know how to read a ridgeline for changing wind, how to build a fire that will not announce itself to the whole valley, how to maintain a chainsaw without letting it bite me, and how to use a radio without expecting anyone to answer. I have worked wildland fire lines in the west and backcountry patrols in the northeast. I like quiet, and I do not mind being alone, because alone does not judge, and alone does not panic. The first day the emergency tones came across the weather band, they were vague. A fast-spreading illness, people asked to shelter at home. I listened at the dock house on a small portable radio that could tune weather channels and the standard bands. That night, the county channel went from normal chatter to thin. The next morning, statewide messages looped with the same phrases about public safety and avoiding travel corridors. It was clear by noon that the main road west of Blue Mountain Lake was clogged with people leaving. The sound of distant engines came and went like a storm far off. By the second sunset, all official dispatches from our county were silent. I had a choice, same as everyone. Join the line of vehicles searching for fuel and supplies, or step out of the stream and hold a quiet place. I chose the dock house. The building is simple, a single room with a small office and a back storage area where life jackets and outboard parts hang on old nails. The front double doors face the water and swing wide for moving coolers and rental gear. Two windows look south over the lake. A ladder goes up to a short roof deck where I used to take an occasional lunch if I was on call nearby. Under the dock, there is a shallow draft aluminum fishing boat with oars and a 10 horsepower outboard motor. The fuel tank is metal and could be stowed inside the boat. It is no speed machine and not meant for rough water, but on calm mornings it will carry 2 or 3 people and a week's worth of supplies across the lake without complaint. I decided to make the dock house a place I could hold quietly for weeks. The first day, I moved all the racks and bins against the back wall and cleared a sleeping area. I stacked marine-grade plywood, 3 sheets I found in the shed, next to the windows and cut them to fit with a handsaw, keeping noise low. I drilled pilot holes and screwed the plywood over the windows from the inside, then backed the screws up with carriage bolts and washers so I could retighten if the boards swelled from the damp air. I set felt pads between wood and glass to keep pressure even. I did not seal the edges completely. I wanted ventilation and the option to look out through small angles. I left one sliding viewing slit in each panel, just wide enough for binoculars and a narrow light beam. I braced the double doors by wiring 2 dock bumpers across the inside hinges as shock absorbers and weaving mooring rope in a crisscross pattern between 4 heavy eye bolts set into the door frame. The rope was nylon, 1/2 inch. It has a little stretch. That buys a second or 2 if someone hits the doors hard. I drove 2 heavy lag bolts into the floor in front of the doors and tied the rope to them with figure-8 knots I could untie quickly. No loose ends, nothing to snag my boots if I had to move in a hurry. I took 6 large boating coolers, white plastic with thick walls, and filled them with sand from the narrow beach, using a 5-gallon bucket and the short-handled shovel from the shed. Each cooler weighed somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds once packed tight. I lined them across the door at knee height and across the windows on the inside, building a barrier that would absorb force and also stop anything sliding across the floor at me if the front was breached. I positioned 2 more coolers at the rear door, which was smaller and easier to barricade with a single 2x6 board across metal brackets. I stapled old fishing nets across every gap larger than a hand, including the roof ladder opening. Nets do not stop anyone determined, but nets slow hands and feet. And slow is the difference between me stepping left and not being there when a reach blindly grabs for a boot. I set up water. 4 blue plastic water barrels had survived the summer in the shed. Each barrel held roughly 55 gallons. I rinsed them with a weak bleach solution, swished and dumped, then rolled them to the back corner and set them on 2x4 rails to keep them off the damp floor. I ran a simple rain catch system from the roof. A short section of aluminum gutter I scrounged from an old downspout, angled into a mesh screen, then into a clean barrel. I sealed the barrel lid except for a tight grommet where the water hose entered to keep insects out. I did not rely on rain alone. Raquette Lake is right outside, but every clean gallon I could catch meant less noise and risk drawing water at night. For drinking, I kept a portable gravity filter that uses a hollow fibre membrane. I also kept a backup system. Boil in a covered pot on a camp stove for 1 minute at a rolling boil. I wrote the procedures on a piece of cardboard and thumbtacked it above the barrels. Filter for taste, boil for certainty. Keep lids closed. Treat water like it matters, because it does. Power was a 12-volt deep-cycle marine battery I salvaged from a rental boat. It was a Group 27 size, heavy enough to make my forearms burn when I carried it inside. I checked the charge with a small meter, enough to run a radio, charge a flashlight, and power a small fan at low speed for a short time. I had a compact solar panel I had purchased on my own, 100 watts, designed to work with a charge controller that prevents overcharging. I mounted the panel on the roof deck at a low angle, hidden from the road by the roof's slight pitch. The charge controller sat inside where I could see its simple lights. It made a faint blink I covered with tape at night. For backup, I had a small inverter generator. It is the quiet kind that adjusts its engine speed depending on load. I do not like running engines when I need to be unheard, so I built a sound-reducing box from plywood and insulation that would not melt or off gas at modest temperatures. I cut vent holes low and high to draw air through the box. I attached aluminum dryer duct to the exhaust and extended it through a hole in the dock skirt so the exhaust bubbled directly into the water under the structure. Water does not swallow all sound, but the bubbles and the dock's mass turned a motor into a muffled vibration you would not notice unless you stood on the boards. I set a carbon monoxide alarm, battery operated, inside the dock house at floor level to watch for any exhaust creeping back. I wrote on the same cardboard, generator only in daylight, only when wind carries sound away from shore, and only for short intervals to top off the battery bank. I also wrote, never while asleep, never with doors closed tight. I laid out my tools, a basic tool roll, a small torque wrench for outboard bolts, a plug socket, a file, spare pull cords, a tube of marine grease, 2 spark plugs, a roll of electrical tape, a handful of heat shrink butt connectors, 3 hose clamps, a spare fuel line bulb. I placed a first aid kit in the storage cubby and added gauze, a roll of self-adhering wrap, adhesive bandages, a bottle of eye wash, an antiseptic, a small thermometer, and a cheap but reliable fingertip oxygen monitor. I taped a short checklist inside the kit: airway, breathing, bleeding, heat loss. When you're alone, the worst injury is the one that makes you slow. I kept 2 firearms secured in a locked case. One was a pump-action shotgun with a short hunting barrel. The other was a small-bore rifle with a simple optic. Both are legal in this region. I keep them clean, and I keep them as a last resort. I prefer barriers and time. Time is the most useful tool I own. After 2 days of steady work, the dock house felt less like a summer shack and more like a quiet bunker. My daily routine was simple and repeated the same way every morning, because repetition builds habits that do not fail under stress. At 5:30 a.m., I woke without an alarm. I lay still and listened. If I heard water slap the dock or the faint clink of a loose cleat, I waited for it to become a pattern or go silent. I checked the carbon monoxide alarm. I cracked the door an inch and sniffed for smoke. I climbed the ladder to the roof deck with binoculars and made a slow sweep. I scanned the opposite shore first, because eyes are drawn to what is close and miss what is far. And the far shoreline tells you who is moving and where the wind carries sound. I checked the road turnout where the gravel meets the highway above the launch, and I checked the small public picnic area 200 yards east. Empty most mornings. Sometimes a black shape that turned out to be a stump would trick my eyes while the light was low. I set silent fishing lines, not rods. I'm not trying to enjoy a fight. I'm trying to eat. I tied 2 leader lines off the far pilings and dropped barbless hooks tipped with small pieces of preserved bait. I tied small indicator threads on the lines so I could tell from inside if something pulled. I do not overfish. I prefer more days of food to one full cooler. At 6:30 a.m., I tuned the radio. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration weather broadcast was still automated, reading weather for North Country lakes and mountains. That meant the local transmitter had power and an intact signal chain. The county emergency channel stayed silent. The state emergency band looped announcements recorded the previous day at best. I switched to a handheld receiver that could scan amateur radio frequencies. I kept it set to listen only. I am licensed, but I did not key the microphone. Talking into the air is like turning a light on at night. You decide when it is worth it, and you choose carefully. I heard voices sometimes, weak, strained, a call sign that did not repeat. I kept the dockhouse dark until sunrise fully illuminated the lake. Daylight hides small movements better than dusk. If I needed to leave the building, I did so at first light or last. I kept a dull-coloured tarp under the dock to hide the aluminum boat, and I helped its camouflage with reeds tied loosely over the sides, so the hardware and the bright interior would not glare. I secured the oars with a light cord so they would not knock in a breeze. A single metallic tap can carry across still water for a surprising distance. The third morning, I saw the first people. They came by canoe, 2 hulls lashed together with a pole. A man in the bow of the first canoe waved a paddle and called for help as they rounded the small headland east of my dock. His voice carried easily. He was not shouting hard, but any sound a human mouth makes on this lake goes a long way. I raised the binoculars and counted 6 people total. They looked like they'd been out on the water all night. One person lay low under a blanket. Another held the bow steady, while the person in the back steered with long, confident strokes. They came toward the dockhouse at a steady pace. On the south tree line, where the wind combs the pines, I caught motion. 2 figures. One moved in short, stuttering steps. The other followed without reacting to any branch in the face or uneven ground. They did not look at the lake or each other. They moved like people who had one idea and it pulled them forward and did not let go. I lowered the binoculars and listened. I had 2 choices that were obvious, and a third that took a breath to see. I could step out and wave the canoes away with my body in my hands, make it clear this dockhouse was not taking new people. I could throw the doors open and pull them in, run the motor at full throttle if things turned, or I could help without being found. I chose the third. I stayed inside and waited. I let the canoes pass so they would not fix on the dock. I prepared a small dry bag with 2 bottles of water, a sealed bag of trail food, 2 large adhesive bandages, and a printed card with a simple map, lake outlines, and 3 hand-drawn symbols for the safest shoreline pull-out points within a mile, with the note, "Quiet at dawn," and a small triangle marking an overgrown boat ramp a 1/4 mile west. I stepped under the dock in knee-deep water and tied the dry bag to a submerged root, letting the bright cord float on the surface at the place I had marked. When you are tired and scared, a simple shape means more than a paragraph. When the canoes drew near the point I had marked on the map, I hung a small mirror under the eaves and let the sun flash twice toward the water only. 2 brief points, not a beam into the woods, and I saw the bow paddler shift his head and look where the flashes hit. He turned his canoe toward the cove. I stayed put. The figures in the trees followed the echo of his earlier call, dropping onto the beach 50 yards east. One slipped and fell, then stood. They seemed to know the general direction of the noise rather than the exact line. I watched their heads at the level of the bank. The canoes slipped out of sight into the cove. I did not move. 10 minutes later, the canoes pushed off again, now hugging the shore westward, paddles low and quiet. The man in the bow glanced back toward the dockhouse and raised a hand for an instant, a thank you without a sound. That night I walked the shoreline west with a red-lensed light and checked the rock I'd marked as a drop. The dry bag was gone. In its place, a small roll of line and 2 fish hooks were wrapped in a piece of cloth. Not payment, not a message with names, just a loop closed with another quiet loop. For 3 days, that pattern held. People passed by the lake in small numbers. A pair of kayaks. A canoe with a family whose paddling rhythm told me they were beginners but determined. I kept my distance. I left small caches after dark near the points I believed they would stop. 10-minute walks. No footprints if I could avoid it. If I left anything it would reflect, I covered it with damp leaves. On the 5th day, the wind shifted. I was on the roof deck making the dawn sweep when I smelled the first hint of something dry and sharp under the usual scents of lake and pine. It was smoke, but faint. I turned my head until my nose told me the direction, then brought the binoculars toward the horizon above the west hills. The sky showed a thin grey wash, higher than morning fog. The radio did not report a wildfire. No one was in the tower to do it. Summer storms had passed with lightning 3 nights earlier, and I'd heard no rain hit the roof since. In this country, fires do not run hard through wet hardwood leaf litter the way they do in the western mountain grass, but dry crowns and a steady wind can push embers farther than you think. By the time I finished my sweep, the air had changed from a hint to a background. Smoke carries far. It is also a voice that calls everything to move, animals, people, and those who are not thinking about anything except what moves near them. I needed to prime a plan I had hoped to keep as a contingency only. I packed the aluminum boat without making noise. I laid a low layer of life jackets first so metal on metal would not ring. I loaded a dry bag with 3 days of food at 2,000 calories per day, not counting fish. I added a compact water filter and 2 collapsible bottles. I slid in a small cookpot and a camp stove with 2 fuel canisters. I put the first aid kit in a bright pouch so it would stand out in the dark. I added a basic tool roll and duct tape. I put in a handsaw, the kind that will chew through a branch without binding. I wrapped the shotgun and the small rifle in oiled cloth and placed them where my hands could reach them from the seat, but out of direct sight. I added spare batteries and the handheld radio. I wrote a map on waterproof paper. A rough line to a small island near the middle of the lake, where an old cabin foundation sits in a ring of birch and cedar. I knew that place from patrols years ago. I'd used it as a lunch spot on hot days and picked up other people's cans from the little fire ring that always seemed to reappear no matter how often rangers clean. I did not plan to run loud. I planned to drift and row, with the motor only for crossing open water if the wind turned the fishing boat into a slow billboard. By late afternoon, the smoke lay thin under the higher blue. The sun had a pale edge. I set the boat under the dock and waited until a full hour before dusk to test the engine, running it in a short trickle of throttle with the propeller in the water to keep sound down. It caught and ran smoothly. I shut it off and stowed the fuel bulb tucked under the gunnel, so nothing shiny would reflect. That evening, as I took the last light readings on the roof deck and decided I would stay the night and move at dawn, I saw them. They were not in trouble, not in the way the first canoe group had been. They came on foot from the forest, 4 shapes moving along the old deer path that parallels the lake. They stayed below the ridgeline and off the road, They moved with that particular careful speed that tells you they have been quiet for days and it is a choice, not a panic. The leader was a woman with a short-brimmed cap and a stripped-down hiking pack. The second carried a long duffel and a collapsible fishing rod. The third helped the fourth, a person whose gait flagged with every 10th step. They reached the edge of my small beach and stopped, eyes scanning in all the places where someone might watch. The leader looked once at the dockhouse and then past it, not fixing on the building like a destination, but checking it like you check an opening before stepping through. I stayed still and watched. Then I looked farther into the trees and saw 3 figures behind them on the path, the wrong kind of quiet. The back 3 walked with chins low and arms that did not swing. They moved toward the beach with patient inevitability. They were not close enough yet to force a run, but they would be, and soon. The leader looked at the water and then at her group. She did not raise her voice. She pressed 2 fingers in the air, and the group stepped into the shallows and walked knee-deep toward the dock's shadow. The wrong kind of quiet came to the path edge at the same time, and the first one stepped onto the beach, feet sinking slightly. The sand recorded the way the toes dragged. The leader and her people did not look back. They stayed in the water and let the lake hide their steps. I opened the door before the leader reached the pilings. Up close, they were younger than I had thought, except for one. The woman in the cap introduced herself by first name, Naveen. She spoke quietly, like someone who has been prompting others to repeat names correctly their entire life. The man with the duffel was Caleb, a former line cook and maintenance worker who looked like he had spent too much time in cold storage rooms. The older man, Ben, carried a tool roll that had probably once belonged to a utility crew. He had hands that didn't mind rough edges, and a way of looking at things like he could see inside them. The fourth, Alina, was pale and shivering under a damp jacket. She was in her late teens, a student who had twisted her ankle and kept walking anyway. Naveen told me she is studying nursing. Calm eyes, no bravado, good judgment. I let them in and swung the doors closed. I brought a towel from a bin and handed it to Alina, then the oxygen monitor. Her pulse read higher than I liked, but not dangerous. I gave her a heat-reflective blanket from the first aid kit. We kept the lights off. I did not give anyone a speech about rules. You learn more by how people move inside a small space than by what they say they can do. We listened to the beach, and we heard the wrong kind of quiet pass like a slow wheel, feet dragging through wet sand. One set after another, then a pause, then another shuffle. The steps moved on, not sure why they had come down into the waterline, just drawn by the residual echo of voices on other days. When it was fully dark, we spoke in low voices about the plan. I told them what the roof deck shows at dawn. Naveen told me the route they had walked from a campsite near 8th Lake, keeping to indirect trails. They had seen smoke days ago. That is what pushed them toward the water. She does not like the phrase, "we got lucky," because it sounds like you can count on luck. I told her I share the same opinion. I did not explain that I had chosen to stay alone. Explaining a decision made for yourself reads like a defense when other people need shelter. I offered space and water and the plan to leave the dock at dawn if the smoke thickened. Naveen nodded once and did not add anything. It was an agreement without any grand language around it. We set watches. I took the first from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. on the roof deck, listening for steps on boards and water under the dock. Caleb took after me, then the older man, Ben. Alina slept. Naveen slept with her pack against her knees and her boots still on. We slept and watched in a rhythm that calms the mind. At 3:30 a.m., I woke to the smell of stronger smoke. It was not thick, it did not sting the eyes, but it was there, a presence filling the space between the pines. I went to the roof deck and checked the horizon. A low, colourless glow sat beyond the hills to the west, too uniform for a sunrise. It was fire beyond distance. The air felt dry. At 4:30 a.m., I had hot water boiled and poured it over instant coffee for the people who wanted it. No one turned it down. We ate small food, one granola bar shared between two. a handful of nuts each, a few dried apple slices to keep mouths from feeling like cardboard. The lake at night sounds like it is sleeping. It is not asleep. It is just making its small noises instead of its larger ones. At 5:15 a.m., when the sky was grey but the shoreline still a silhouette, we moved. We made 2 trips under the dock. On the first, we loaded the aluminum boat with the pre-packed gear and the lightest person. On the second, we moved tool rolls and water. We balanced weight fore and aft and kept our voices to whispers. We did not run the motor. We drifted out on a line and rowed away from the dock at a shallow angle, keeping the pilings between us and the shore path. When we cleared the dock's shadow, I steered with a single oar the way my father taught me years ago. Long, slow push, blade parallel on the return, and let the boat fall toward the mid-lake island on a diagonal as the light came up. Smoke became a haze at the mid-level of the trees, not a ceiling. We crossed the longest reach while the air was still cool. By 6:45 a.m., we reached the little island. If you do not know it, you miss it. It is a bump of land with no tall trees, mostly birch and cedar with a thick ground cover of moss and ferns. On one side, a ring of flat stones circles the remnants of a cabin foundation that probably rotted away 40 years ago. On the other side, old iron spikes sit in a log like teeth, where someone had once tied a boat and left the spikes for the next person who needed them. We pulled the boat under overhanging branches and let the reeds hide the aluminum shine. We moved carefully ashore and took the first 10 minutes to watch and listen. No one spoke. No splashing from the far shore. No voices carried by morning air. Birds kept their own schedule. If someone had occupied this island recently, the birds would have told us by their sudden stops and nervous bursts. They did not. We made camp without making a campsite. That means no tent to announce colour and shape. We set a light tarp between low branches and the ground to keep damp off sleeping pads. We placed the first aid kit where a hand could find it in the dark. We placed the water filter and the stove near the edge where a person could kneel and fill without standing up and making a silhouette. I kept the generator in the boat unstarted and the solar panel stayed in my pack. I do not like bright squares in trees. We agreed on the basics. We limited voice time to check-ins and real planning. We moved at a slow human pace, not the frantic pace that makes mistakes. We reserved 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. for radio listening windows and the last 10 minutes of daylight for decision windows, when we chose what to carry near our bodies all night and what could stay put. We divided tasks without drawing up a chart. I went to water with Caleb and filtered 3 litres at a time into collapsible bottles. I taught him how to keep the intake from pulling the clean water we had just filled. Naveen examined Alina's ankle. It was a simple sprain, no swell beyond the mild, full range of motion, but uncomfortable, tender at the ligaments. She wrapped it with self-adhesive bandage and set a plan. No jumping, no twisting, and a slow exercise once per hour to keep ankle pumps moving to reduce swelling. Ben walked the island and identified 2 dead limbs that could be cut for shelter poles if we needed to lash a windbreak. He did not cut them yet. He waited to see what the weather would do. At noon, the smoke thinned, then thickened, then thinned again as the wind shifted. The radio gave us nothing. The weather station repeated an automated voice. The emergency channel stayed empty. On an amateur radio frequency, a voice tried to reach a friend in Tupper Lake. The call timed out into static. The voice waited and then tried again. Not louder, not more panicked. Just the way a person places a stone on a stack because it is what they do. By evening, we had a rhythm for one day. We planned for the next. On the second day, we heard people on the North Shore. It was such a normal sound I almost smiled before I remembered what normal sounds might bring now. 2 people talked in low voices about paddling. A third person answered with a cough, soft at first, then a little harder. The cough had weight. We looked at each other and kept still. A canoe slid past 100 yards out. The bow moved like it knew where it wanted to go. The stern wandered a little. The boat kept going east, and the voices faded. We did nothing that would draw them. That night, we established a fixed watch that matched skills and rest. From 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., Ben watched. He said his eyes go soft in the first hour of darkness and then sharpen. From 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., Caleb watched. He used to get off late nights at the restaurant and had the habit of alertness at that time. From 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., I watched. It is the slot where I am usually the most awake anyway. From 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., Naveen took the last watch because she said waking up early to prepare for a dawn clinic became second nature during her hospital rotations. We kept watches short and strict. No one argued about it. It was good to work with people who understood the relationship between small structure and big outcomes. On the third day, we encountered the wrong kind of quiet on the island itself. It began with water movement that did not fit the wind, a soft push under the branches, then a scrape. I was at the waterline securing the filter and turned my head before I moved the rest of my body. A shape drifted against the outside of the reeds. It was a person, but it did not move with any control. The hands paddled at the surface without alternating, pushing water forward but not changing direction. The face was turned down. The legs made a slow walking motion that did not touch anything. The body bumped the reeds again, then slid along them and drifted past. I felt a wash of relief that the water seemed to keep the drift parallel to the island rather than in toward our hiding place. Then the heel of a boot caught for a second between two reeds and turned the body sideways. The hand shifted and the head struck the branch I was holding. The sound was a soft, wood-on-wood knock as the skull met the limb through a layer of wet hair. The body did not react in the way a person would, who felt pain and pulled back. The arms pressed again, and the body moved on. I did not move for 10 breaths. I counted. After that, we agreed on a boundary. No one would sit with limbs in the water for more than a few seconds at a time, and no one would set their back to the reeds. We would fetch water kneeling with our torso behind a trunk where we could pivot away. We would not handle ropes or anchors without checking water first with a stick. People used to say that water is safety here. The truth is that water is a medium. It carries quiet, it carries noise, it carries bodies where you do not expect them to go. It surprises you if you decide the lake has a single rule. It does not. It has several, and they change. On the fourth morning, we saw the first true pressure come toward our island. It was not a group hunting for us. It was a wave of movement driven by the smoke that had thickened in the last 12 hours. We heard the sound before we saw the shapes, a low rustle in the trees as animals moved away from the slope, followed by an unnatural rhythm of steps hitting wood and sand without coordination. The shoreline west of us filled with random bodies by degrees. 2 came down a slope and toppled at the edge, then stood and walked again. Another 3 stepped into water up to their knees and turned their heads the same direction, as if they were listening for a sound the wind changed. They did not travel in a line together. They traveled in a loose crowd, drawn by something none of us could hear. They crowded the shoreline and then started to fan along it, as if they would eventually discover every inlet and every dock by pure persistence. We decided to move again, not far, but to reconfigure. I took the first canoe run alone at 11 a.m. with the wind at my back, so I could drift silently eastward and reconnoitre the narrow rock channel between the island and a smaller islet marked by a pair of rotted pilings. If we could bring our boat around the far side and anchor it with a long line to the west, we could use the island as a windbreak and keep the aluminum hull out of sight, while still having a quick push-off path if we needed to go across open water. I wore dull colours and took only the oars. I did not carry the motor. I crossed the channel and lay low in the canoe under a spruce limb as the crowd on the far shore shifted without pattern. I watched for 20 minutes and mapped a line in my head. Back at camp, we divided gear by weight and urgency. 1 bag that was non-negotiable and rode with us. 1 bag that we would cache under rocks, sealed and labelled with the date and contents. 1 bag that we would leave on purpose to drop weight without remorse if the moment came when moving fast mattered more than having a second stove. We cached the backup fuel canister and a set of spare shoes in a waterproof bag under a flat stone at the north edge. We sketched a map on bark to find it again and dropped a line of 3 small stones in a straight row, the way a child might line up marbles. That kind of small human order will be invisible to anyone else. It will be obvious to you when you return. We made the move at 2 p.m, which is not my favorite time to move on water because the lake catches glare and you show yourself. But the wind at that hour moved hard from the west, and the air filled with enough white smoke that our profiles blended with the wet grey blue. We pushed the boat, tied a long line to a cedar trunk, and worked around the island without putting a paddle high. The move took 8 minutes. It felt like an hour. When we settled behind the islet, the reeds reached farther out, and the old rotted pilings gave us a place to tie a second line to keep our bow from yawing into view. We settled again and breathed again. At dusk, everything changed. I know the exact minute because I looked at my watch the way you do when you want to place a marker in your mind and give your later memory a peg to hang on. It was 7:12 p.m. when a small aluminum skiff rounded the headland to the west and turned toward the island. It had a person at the tiller and 2 in the bow. The boat did not move erratically. It moved like its driver had crossed the lake 100 times and could do it in a fog with nothing but the way wind moves on his cheeks and the way water sounds against a hull. The bow sat low, which meant weight or gear or both. We watched from the trees without moving. I had the rifle within arm's reach. I did not raise it. I do not show a gun if I am not going to use it. I never want to use it. The skiff slowed 200 yards out. The person at the tiller stood and raised a hand with a motion like he was trying to show he was not a threat. He did not call out. He did not wave a white shirt like in movies. He just held a hand up and let the boat drift. We did not answer. The bow passengers looked around at the shoreline. They did not point to the dock house. They did not stare at our island. They scanned evenly, which told me they were not trying to scare someone out of a hiding spot. The driver let the boat drift a little more, then turned the tiller and headed east without passing close. I do not know what they were looking for, but I know what they saw. A small island that did not show bright tarps, a lake where smoke made everything flat, a shoreline that moved a few wrong figures without a plan. They went away. We did not sleep fully that night. We kept the watches and let 2 people rest at a time, but all of us, even the one who slept deepest, lay with muscles ready. You cannot describe that to someone who has not felt it. It is not fear like a movie scene. It is your body telling you you are part animal and you will spring when you must and then be still for an hour again until you spring again. It is not heroic, it is wiring. On the 6th morning, we made the first attempt at building something that would last longer than a day. We began a water-based rope network. The idea is simple. Tie a series of lines from natural anchors, rocks and roots, to fix points in shallow water, then use those lines as handholds to move the boat around the island without using a paddle high or a motor that makes sound. With a rope network, you can walk the boat along with your hands at the waterline and keep your profile low. We tied the first line from the east side of the island to a submerged log, then another from that log to the notch by the old pilings, then a third from the pilings to the cedar near our camp. We made each line slack enough that it would sink and not float, and we tied each with a knot that we could untie even after a soak, bowlines and half hitches with a stopper knot. We tested the system in daylight and did not use it at night unless we had to, because even quiet movements can sound loud when the lake holds its breath. We also laid a simple alarm. We wired small tin fishing bells to a pair of reed clusters on the windward side and ran a fine line back to our camp. If something larger than a fish pushed through the reeds, the line would twitch and the bell would sound softly once before we could place a finger against it to silence it. It is not high technology, it is just a way to earn 1 more second. By the end of the first week, we were not just surviving. We were running a small operation with rules that worked. We had a morning plan, a slow scan, a small breakfast, a water fetch, a gear check, a radio listen. We had an afternoon plan. If the wind was from the west and smoke was high, we used it to move closer to the south shore and observe the gravel road for traffic. If the wind was from the east, we stayed put and kept profiles low. We had an evening plan, set lines, secure gear, talk quietly about what we learned, and write the day's events in a notebook with times. Writing times matters. It keeps you from lying to yourself about what you saw and when. It stops the mind from turning the last quiet day into a story that gives you more credit than you deserve. On the 9th day, I made a decision that shifted us from a handful of people hiding to the start of something else. The canoe pair from the first week returned. This time, only one canoe. The bow paddler's face was more hollow. The canoe moved near the same cove where I'd left the dry bag. I flashed the mirror twice low on the water and saw him turn again and head in. I moved through the trees with Naveen. We stayed back until we saw the shoulder slump that means a person is sitting on the rocks and letting their arms have the first rest in a day. We approached on the soft ground and showed ourselves a little at a time. We gave them water and a simple test. We asked them what they needed, not in a challenge, not as a trap, just the open question. People answering that question tell you if they can think about priorities. These two could. They needed warmth, water, and a place to rest where they would not be seen. They did not ask to join us. They did not make any claim on our space. We invited them to the island with conditions: no fires, no noise, leave at dawn if we ask, or stay with a chore list if we ask. They agreed without drama. We gave them the ankle wrap for the woman in the bow. We gave them watch slots the second night. They took them like they had done watches every night since this began. On the 10th day, we built a second island cache and a third. We placed them at different corners of the lake, near a rock shelf west of Indian Lake Road, under a fallen hemlock branch at a private camp cove with no obvious trail, and inside a hollow at the edge of a little marsh south of the ranger point. Each cache held a sealed bag with basic supplies and a simple ink mark. A rectangle with a short notch on one side. We sketched a crude map of the lake on waterproof paper with 3 small notches drawn at the correct locations. If you did not know the shape, it would look like nothing. If you did know, you would see the pattern and follow it. We gave one copy to the canoe pair when they left, and we kept one in our notebook with a date. On the 12th day, the smoke thickened again, and with it came a larger wave of the wrong kind of quiet. We saw dozens along the shore, then more. We saw them standing knee-deep in water, facing nothing, like they had lost the thread of the noise that brought them there. They drifted and bumped and walked, and the lake carried some away and brought others close. It is not dramatic. It is not a wall of danger. It is a pressured edge that squeezes you until you think badly. We tightened our rope network. We moved without pushing waves on the reeds. We kept our food sealed and our sleeping pads dry and our minds steady. On the 14th day, we had the first conversation about staying long-term. It began with a simple question from Ben, while he checked the charge controller display on the solar panel. How many days do we have until we need more fuel or more food than this lake can give us if we fish cautiously? I answered the way I would answer on a fire line when someone asked me how long a hose lay will hold under 20 pounds of pressure. It depends on what fails and when. Then we did the math, not with hope, not with fear. We looked at the generator and its fuel can. At the current rate of 1 hour every third day, the fuel would last 30 days if we is used sparingly, and the sun stayed bright enough to let the solar panel pick up the load. We looked at food, dry stores, 2 weeks at full calories for everyone. At 3/4 intake and with fish every other day, 4 weeks. At half and with daily protein from fish, 5 or 6, but that eats into long-term health in the cold. We looked at water. As long as the lake was there and we were careful, that is less of a limiting factor, but we treated forever like a false word and wrote, as long as we can work the shoreline with safety. We also looked at the people. People are a resource and a limit. Alina's ankle improved. Caleb found he had a knack for understanding the groove of a plan and keeping it without drifting into shortcuts. Naveen stayed calm, and when she spoke, it was already the end of the thought, not the beginning. Ben kept finding little ways to make systems dependable. A shroud for the carbon monoxide detector so it would not false alarm at dawn temperature shifts. A heavier knot on the tin bell line. That day, we made the first deliberate outbound contact beyond giving a quiet map to a canoe pair. We chose a family camp half a mile east, a private property used in summer and vacant this time of year. I had patrolled this lake for years. I knew the owners were a retired science teacher and a small business owner. They were friendly, but not naive about the woods. They likely stacked winter wood early and kept a radio, because the old man liked to listen to storm reports when snow came. Their camp had a screened porch that faces the water and a small aluminum rowboat pulled up between two trees. If any place was going to be an anchor point for a quiet network around the lake, it would be theirs. We went at 10 a.m. with the wind carrying smoke to the southeast. Naveen and I took the aluminum boat under oars. We stayed close to the shoreline's shadow and landed behind a small rock outcrop. We moved through trees like we always do, checking our feet before we checked our eyes. When we reached the camp clearing, we stopped. The screen door hung open. The porch was neat. The old man would not have left it a mess. A set of footprints crossed the first two boards, then disappeared where the porch planking turns. We waited and listened. We found them inside, not in the wrong way, in the right way. Two people with blankets over their legs and a radio between them. They had been quiet for days. They had water, a small camp stove, and a plan to wait as long as they could, and then move toward town. They had written a note to any passerby. We are here. We have a hand-crank radio and a small amount of food. We will trade information for news. They had arranged the note in a window we could not see from the dock because the angle hid it. We talked across a safe distance. Naveen did the first speaking. She explained we were not robbers. She explained the network we were building, discrete caches, a map that did not look like a map, a rhythm for checking certain points at certain times with low risk. The science teacher nodded slowly. He looked at his wife. She looked at the lake. She said, "We can sit here and wait for the worst kind of surprise, or we can help turn the surprises into planned moments." We nodded back. We left them a map and a small bag of coffee. They gave us a paper with a frequency they had heard traffic on in the mornings and a note that a group in Old Forge was still broadcasting 3 days ago. On the 17th day, we heard the first message that felt like a thread to follow. At 8:10 a.m., the amateur radio whispered through static. Raquette, Long Lake, listening. Group at inlet, marker stones by the bridge. I wrote every word and the time. We heard nothing else for 10 minutes. Then a voice clearer but weaker. Temporary aid drop, inlet, 2 days prior. Moving north along Route 28. Small group, 4, 1 injury, non-critical. It did not repeat. It did not give a call sign. It was there, and then it was not. We discussed it as if we had the luxury to draw circles on a map. We did not. We had a lake and a plan to remain unseen. Still, the information mattered because it gave meaning to the caches and the rope network. It told us the outside world existed beyond the ring of trees. It measured time for us, and it gave us a choice again. Do we reach toward the bridge and try to make ourselves useful as a relay, or do we keep our circle closed? We chose a middle path. We would not leave our island and our hard-won quiet, but we would place a cache near the old railroad grade that turns north, and a second near the outlet stream behind a boulder where the current slows. We would mark these with the same notched rectangle, and we would add a simple number symbol made of 3 lines to mean there is a second one nearby downstream. Anyone who found the first would find the second. Anyone who did not know to look would pass without noticing. We placed both by dusk. We moved back in smoke and silence. On the 20th day, The lake taught us a new rule. Wind can push sound in a direction you do not expect, but current pushes bodies. A cluster of 3 wrong figures drifted into our reed line simultaneously and tangled in a way that looked almost like a single tangle of logs. Their hands moved, their heads turned, their legs scissored. The reeds gave us warning. The tin bell line flicked once, and we stopped breathing before the reeds bent fully. One figure's arm reached under the low limb, where Naveen sometimes kneels to filter water. It groped 3 inches short of the place where her knee would normally be. Then the current released them, and they slid past, as if we were not an island, but a cloud. We moved the filter line a foot back from the reed edge. Small inches matter. We pulled the rope network tighter and adjusted the anchor points so the boat would hold in a location that could not be touched from the reed perimeter by an arm of any length. On the 24th day, the wind reversed and blew the smoke out. The sky turned a hard blue without haze. We saw the hills again, and with them, our anxiety about making smoke of our own returned. We never built a fire on the island. We did not start then. We ate cold food and boiled water until sunset, and then ate cold again. On the 26th day, a person appeared on the dockhouse roof deck. I saw them from the island through binoculars. It was a woman. She held binos to her face as well, and scanned east and west, not seeing us in the shadows. She had a scarf around her neck and a set to her shoulders that told me she was not just looking for a place to hide. She was looking for a way to work with what she saw. She stayed 10 minutes and left a small sign at the door when she went. I could not read it from the island. On the 27th day, we returned to the dockhouse at dawn. We did not go there because we needed it. We went because you do not let a place you fortified and made safe fall into total uncertainty if you can help it. We crossed under oars and beached in the shadow. We approached on the quiet. The note on the door read, "No damage. We took nothing. Smoke less to the west. We are 3. We will stop at the screen porch camp each 3rd day at noon for the next week." The handwriting was careful, like someone practiced letters repeatedly on a slate as a child. The name signed was Maureen. Inside, the dockhouse sat exactly as we had left it, except for one thing. The rope brace on the doors was retied with a better knot. It is a strange feeling to be grateful and unsettled at once. I wrote a reply note. "We are on the island with the birches. We have rope in water. We will watch the porch at noon on those days." I used 1 sentence per line. I do not like mistaken readings. We resumed our place on the island with our pattern intact. That day at noon, we watched the porch through glass. Maureen came to the camp with 2 people. They were wary, but not jumpy. We did not go to them that day. We watched the next noon. They came again. We watched the 3rd time. They came again and left a small bag on a hook. We let 1 day pass. Then we went. What followed across the next 2 weeks did not transform our lives into something easy. It did something better. It kept the hard parts within boundaries we could live with. We built a human rhythm to match the lake rhythm. Here is what the network looked like by day 45. We had 3 island caches and 2 shore caches marked with the notched rectangle. The screen porch camp served as our daytime message center. No one slept there unless they had to. Messages were short and on paper, protected from rain. We did not leave food visible. The dockhouse remained our mainland supply locker. We restocked it twice with careful trips, keeping the generator fuel topped to the level we committed to with our rules. We left the carbon monoxide alarm batteries fresh. We used the solar panel on the roof to refill the battery that ran a small hand radio we kept on a shelf, volume off unless we stood in front of it. The rope network around the island had grown into a web that let us move the boat anywhere around the circle without raising a paddle. We could do it blindfolded because we had practiced with eyes closed and counted grips. We added a 2nd aluminum canoe hidden under reeds on the north side for redundancy. We had a schedule of noon meets at the screen porch with any group that agreed to abide by the porch rules. Arrive quietly, stay 30 minutes, leave a written update about hazards seen and any changes in trail conditions. We established emergency signals. 3 short mirror flashes low to the water for do not approach, a single slow arc for safe to pass, and a protected bell pattern at the island, 5 light touches, for regroup at the island's west side. Our watch hours now accounted for human factors, 2 hours on, 4 off at night, with naps in the afternoon if morning watches ran long. No one argued about sleep. We learned early that a tired person makes the kind of noise that tells the lake everything. We also grew in number, slowly and carefully. Maureen and her 2, who turned out to be a teacher named Greg and an electrician named Sasha, began checking the porch every 3rd day. They were not living at the lake. They were moving between 2 places, another camp we did not know, and a point farther west where they believed a small clinic was operating out of a former gear shop. They agreed to our rules at the porch, and we agreed to theirs at a tree 2 bends down the trail. Their rules were, no one arrives early and hides to catch the other arriving, no gifts left that are not listed on a note, no requests that involve betraying someone else's location or identity. I liked their rules because they acknowledged the thing that many people refused to say aloud. The danger was not only those who moved wrong and made no speech. The danger was also people who had lost their sense that other people mattered beyond their own needs. The rules described behavior that would keep both groups from sliding into the worst version of themselves. We traded quiet gifts. They brought us a hand auger bit and a clamp, which we used to repair a cracked bench at the dockhouse so it would hold weight. We gave them a small solar light and a bag of rice. We swapped knowledge. They told us that the clinic near Inlet had moved twice because the area became too active. We told them about a bend in the rail grade that had eroded into a washout that will turn an ankle if you find it in the dark. These things matter as much as food. We had close calls. Of course we did. You cannot live near water and people and weather without close calls. One afternoon, on day 52, a sudden westerly gust caught a piece of the tarp and popped a corner loose. It flapped once, and in still air, the sound would have carried like a flag. The wind took it and kept it low, but 2 figures on the shore turned their heads. We watched them recalibrate the direction of the sound. They stepped into the lake and moved knee-deep toward our island. We froze. The tin bell line twitched on its own from the wind. I placed my finger on it to still it. The figures came closer until they met a section of reeds so thick that they had to push to move. They pushed for a full minute, then stopped. The wind settled and carried another noise from the far shore. A more attractive noise, a single call. They turned and followed that instead. We moved the tarp that evening and changed the angle. We did not try to make it strong against every possible wind. We made it acceptable against the wind that most often blows here, and acceptable in failure so that if it comes loose again, it will fall quiet, not snap and draw attention. That is how you build in the woods. You make failure gentle. Another time, on day 61, Caleb took the canoe out to check the western cache and returned later than we expected. He had waited in reeds while a small group using the trail moved past, talking in normal voices. He described their talk, not loud, but confident. They carried gear and did not look around in the careful way. They were not trying to hide. They were traveling with an attitude that told him they believed the worst had passed. He did not agree. Neither did I. We adjusted our routines for a few days to avoid their probable path. We erased the footprints in the bark at the screen porch by rubbing a little pine sap across the ink to blur it. If you know what to look for, you see it. If you do not, you see nothing. On day 68, we heard the words we had been waiting for and dreading at the same time. Winter coming. It was Ben who said it quietly while he wrote down the day's events. He had been watching the lake surface and the sky and seeing the same signs I saw. The nights colder, the mornings with breath just visible, the rain less frequent, the maple leaves turning at the edges. With winter comes a new set of rules. Water steel colds the fingers. Ice makes noise. Snow keeps footprints all day. Fish feeding changes. Generators fail faster because the fuel thickens and people think they can warm them inside. We made a winter plan and started building it. while the trees still had the strength to hold leaves. We cut poles and built a low, tight shelter that would hold heat better in wind. We lined the sleeping area with dry spruce boughs for insulation. We set the stove and pipe we had hauled from the dockhouse in 3 trips, hard work, worth it, and built a stove platform of stones that would hold heat after the flame went out. We did not plan to burn all day. We planned to run it for an hour and then let the stones release their warmth slowly. We packed an extra carbon monoxide detector under the shelter near the floor. We collected duff and filled cracks. We sealed seams with mud that would dry and then be easy to break later when we needed to disassemble without leaving a permanent mark. We built ice plans the way we built rope plans. We decided where ice forms first and last, where pressure ridges will appear, where a person can step safely once the cold comes. We wrote a rule on the shelter wall with charcoal: no first ice before midday sun, no last ice after noon. People die most often at the start and the end of ice. We would not be people who die that way. We taught the others what I had learned on winter patrols: how to read the colour of ice, how to listen for a hollow echo, how to carry a short pole to spread weight if you have to cross a questionable area, how to crawl backward with elbows if you break through so you do not load fresh ice that is thinner than the ice that just failed. We packed spare dry clothing in a sealed bag at the island's highest point, not in a low spot where lake fog would damp it. It is no good having a dry bag if the air inside it smells like wet leaves. We also made a human winter plan: who speaks first at dawn when minds are dull with cold, who checks the radio at 7 a.m. and 5 p.m, how we handle the first argument when lack of light makes patience thin. We wrote, when words get short, take a walk around the island once and return. It is easier to follow a rule you can see with your feet than a rule that lives in a paragraph. On day 75, we nearly lost the boat to a night gust. The long line we had tied to the cedar had a hidden nick we had not felt when we checked it. At 2:30 a.m, a gust came down the slope like someone opened a door. The line snapped with a low pop. The boat caught the next gust like a wing and slid 10 feet. The tin bell line rang once and woke me. I rolled and grabbed the line we had tied for exactly this situation, a slack emergency line that held the stern. I pulled hand over hand while Caleb threw his weight into the anchor with me, and the boat came back to the reeds. In the morning, we replaced the line with a new one. We cut the old one into short pieces because a short rope with a nick is a useful tie. A long rope with a nick is a failure waiting for a gust you do not predict. On day 80, a snow fell. It did not stick. It swirled and melted on water and damp bark, but it reminded us that the lake's gentle lapping will turn to grinding soon, and then to silence with occasional groans. Our world will get smaller. Sound will travel differently. We will see farther through bare trees. We will also be seen farther. We practice moving in the open with slow, deliberate steps, rather than quick dashes that leave trails of broken crust when the first real snow arrives. We put away anything that shines. We blacked out bright parts of the aluminum hull with charcoal and oil rubbed thin. On day 85, the radio offered a plan that lined up with what we had built. A voice with a measured calm we all leaned toward said that a group at a former boatworks near the eastern end of Fourth Lake had begun establishing a water-based mutual aid route, places to leave sealed bags, times to check for a lantern glow hidden by a board so it cast on water only, and 2 daily windows for whisper broadcasts on a set frequency. They were not calling it a community. They were not making promises. They described behaviours and times. It sounded like our rules spoken by someone we had not met. We wrote the times in our notebook. We adjusted our routine to listen. We did not go to them. We did not ask them to come to us. We did something smaller and more durable. We matched their cadence. At 6 a.m. and 6 p.m, we listened. We did not broadcast. We heard others begin to shape their days to that time too. A pattern became a habit. I prefer habits over big plans. Habits stack, plans fall. On day 90, the canoe pair returned again. Their faces were thinner, their movements smarter. They told us the first freeze had kissed the shallow bays north of Long Lake and pushed fish deeper. They told us a group of 3 who had loudly claimed a boathouse as their own had moved on after 2 weeks because noise draws problems like a porch light draws moths. They told us their hands hurt in the morning and the ankle that had healed for the woman still twinged in the cold. We gave them hand warmers from the shelf at the dock house and a length of soft cloth to wrap the paddle grips. They gave us a spool of stainless wire and a bag of dried beans they had traded for at a place we had not heard of. In quiet moments, at the edge of the roof deck, or with my boots in a dry patch of needles, I thought about the decision I had made weeks ago at the dock house when I stayed rather than join the jam of vehicles turning fuel into heat on a highway. I did not think of it as right or wrong. I thought of it as a path that turned into other paths, and each choice at each bend needed to be made on its own merits, not because the first one demanded loyalty. You can change the way you are working without changing who you are. Here is what I know by day 100. A lake gives you an exit and a trap. You choose which it is by the way you move. A group is not safer simply because it has more bodies. A group is safer when each person knows what they do at 2 a.m. when a line breaks and the boat decides to leave. Smoke lies and tells the truth. It lies by hiding you from other people who would help. It tells the truth by warning you that wind carries not just air but ideas of movement to everything that can move. Food is both calories and routine. If you eat at 7 a.m. and 5 p.m., you think straight at 3 p.m. because your body trusts you to feed it before darkness. Rules that start small save you later. No first ice before midday sun is a rule you will be glad you obeyed, even if you never know the exact day it saved you. Quiet does not mean safety. We stay quiet. We also coordinate slowly, steadily, with people whose names we write down and whose faces we can draw from memory. Isolation kept me alive the first week. It was not the enemy. It was my tool. But people, carefully chosen, quietly integrated, are why I'm here at day 100 with a system that makes sense. I used to plan for single outcomes. Cut a line around a fire and hold it. Build a bridge and cross it. Now I plan for patterns. Smoke days and clear days. Wind west and wind east. Noon meets and night watches. Rope networks and glass signals. If you ask me what the endpoint is, I will tell you I do not have one. Endpoints are for closed stories. This is not closed. Winter will come to Raquette Lake. The rope will smear with ice and be hard to grip with bare hands. We will add wool mittens and a strategy for warming fingers without steam. We will lower the tarp and lose the luxury of standing to stretch under it. The wrong kind of quiet will stiffen and slow, and that might help us or it might not. We will find out by being there and paying attention. We will hold the dock house and the island. We will grow our map of rectangles with notches. We will keep the porch appointments. We will leave coffee and take wire. We will treat information like food. Store some, share some, and do not leave it where animals can get into it. In spring, if spring arrives the way it always has, ice will rot from the edges first, and we will rewrite the rules on the shelter wall with charcoal so they match the season. We will watch the lake reawaken, and we will be ready for the new shape of danger and the new shape of help. If you are reading this on a piece of paper left on a porch, or if you are hearing me speak it into a recorder that I place inside a sealed bag under a flat stone with the notched rectangle scratched into its surface, you now know the plan. It is not dramatic. It is not a speech. It is a list of behaviors we repeat. Approach quietly. Signal low on the water. Do not call out unless there is no other way. If you need help, say what you need first. If you can help, say what you can do next. If you carry a tool, know the name of each part you can maintain by hand. If you carry a radio, listen first and talk last. If you carry the weight of someone else, carry it with your knees bent and your back straight and set it down when you must. If you carry fear, put it where you can see it and make a rule around it so it does not leak into places where it will tilt your judgment. If you come to the island, look for the rope below the waterline and test it with one finger before you trust it. If you come to the dockhouse, check the carbon monoxide alarm before you run the generator. If you come to the porch, leave a note with time, place, and what you saw on the trail. We are here, we are staying hidden, and we are making quiet lines between quiet places. We fight when we must, which means mostly we fight to keep the rules that work and to keep panic from writing our plan for us. We defend ourselves by building layers of time between us and anything that comes wrong out of the trees. We survive by being predictable to each other and unpredictable to everything else. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.